We've got a number of people, man, prompt right on time. Love it.
Yeah.
Good to, well, we can't see you all, but you can see us. Happy Thursday, everyone, and thank you for joining. We're excited for the conversation here today. If you've joined one of our past webinars, you may have met or virtually met Shannon and I before, but we'll do intros here in a moment. We're really excited to discuss. It sounds negative, but we're excited to discuss the pitfalls that people fall into. Not because we want to celebrate the pitfalls, but I think both Shannon and I were discussing this earlier, but rather because they are avoidable and they are solvable. But while we're giving folks a few minutes to join, especially those on the East Coast, maybe grabbing some lunch before they join, would love to have people add into the chat where you're calling in from, and if you have one top of mind. Would love to hear what folks' greatest challenge in strategic planning or execution is today. It'll help either validate or devalidate, I guess, the four that we're going to present here. But would love to get folks started in the chat there. For context, both Shane and I are sitting about 5 feet apart, just separated by a wall here in Indianapolis, where most of our team here at Elate is based. Oh, another indie folks. Love it. Hello from across town. Columbus, Ohio, not far, not far. Here we go. Georgia's our current furthest. See if anyone can beat that. I wonder if we should do I'm not a massive well, I'm not up with the times on a lot of things, but I always feel like when a podcast gets big, they do like a live show, Shannon. Perhaps for indie folks, we could bring folks in and do like a live.
Bring folks in, do fireside chat style conversation.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Oh
There
yeah.
we go. I was gonna say we always somebody from Europe or Australia always gets to chime
Yep.
in and wins. We've had a couple that come from East Asia as well. So cheers to everybody. I love seeing the diversity and the demographic across the globe. Welcome.
Yeah. We'll give maybe a minute or two more here and then we'll dive in. St. Louis, Missouri, my hometown. I just was talking to a customer who spent some time in St. Louis, and I think we spent at least 5 to 7 minutes before I was like, we need to cut this off. We could talk about St. Louis all day. We'll take that and maybe grab coffee sometime instead. But hello from St. Louis. All right. We're gonna dive in here. St. Louis favorite food destination. Yeah, if you've gone to the Hill, some excellent Italian there. I still have parents and a brother that live there, so we go back and always try out the newest restaurants that they've discovered. And I've yet to have one disappoint.
There you go.
Well, we'll go ahead and dive in. I'm gonna stop responding to St. Louis comments because I could go. We could just do a webinar on St. Louis, quick pivot. But instead, we're gonna talk about what everyone signed up for. If you forget what you signed up for, we'd love to reinform you here. Really, what we're focused on today is talking about the biggest mistakes or pitfalls that we see and admittedly have even fallen into ourselves in strategy execution. As most folks here are either going into a new year of strategy, going into maybe year two of three of a broader plan, or if you're on a non-standard fiscal year, so our education folks, some nonprofits, Australia, whatever that looks like. A new year is always still a good, even if it's just a calendar year, a good reset. So we want to talk through what those look like, especially for many folks who are in planning right now. You've probably spent a lot of time on it already and are probably going to be spending more. So let's talk about what those are. Let's name them. Let's talk about how we actually avoid them. It's great to know it's pitfall. It's even better if you can find a way around it. So that's really what we're going to be focusing on here today. Quick round of introductions here. If we haven't had the chance to meet, I'll kick things off and then Shannon hand it to you. My name's Abby Parker. I'm one of the co-founders and COO here at Elate. I love to eat, sleep, and breathe all things strategy execution. I have been known to even have some sort of a strategy framework for my family, even. So I do definitely take it too far, but I really just frankly like love understanding how to take chaos and take a vision of where you want to go and find a way to actually get there. So excited for the conversation here today and am joined by Shannon Keedy. Shannon, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. I'm Shannon Keedy. I'm the Director of Solutions Consulting here at Elate. And I, like Abby, also adore strategy, honestly, more than I should. I really believe, as you all know, that strategy execution is the primary driver for businesses' success and sometimes ultimate failures. And so being able to come alongside that on the pre-sale side of things and primarily working on the post-sale side and really walking our customers through how to leverage their strategic plans in Elate and then coaching them to ultimately be even more successful than what they were on the trajectory for. So I'm excited to leverage that experience in this conversation today.
Perfect. From an agenda standpoint, really, we're going to be focusing the vast majority of our time on these pitfalls. That's what you signed up for. That's what we want to make sure we're delivering on. So we'll dive into that piece and spend most of our time there, not just talking about the pitfalls themselves, but again, how to avoid those. We're going to use that to then anchor into one of the best ways that you can avoid definitely the last of the four, but if not all of them, is by talking through what a dynamic operating cadence means. Frankly, that sounds like a lot of buzzwords. What we're talking about here are like rituals, habits. What are you building in to your plan to make sure you're not spending countless hours building it and no time executing on it. And then we'll talk through how you leverage AI. I know everyone's probably sick of hearing even the letters AI at this point, but there is a lot there that can help unlock this as well. So we're going to talk through how that can help, especially for strategy and operations folks, where often you're a team of single digits for sure, if not a team of one or two. How can we leverage that? And we'll end with Q&A. I will say there's a spot to leave Q&A in the Zoom meeting here. Feel free to be asking questions throughout. If it's relevant, we'll bring it right into it. We can keep this interactive. If not, we'll be sure to answer those at the end. So feel free to drop those in whenever throughout the chat, both in the chat or the Q&A, and we're excited to answer those. Please feel free to ask the hard questions, challenge Shane and I on this. Again, we love to talk through these things, and we're excited to talk through some real examples here.
Fantastic. Well, what you all have been waiting for. This is what we've identified right now as the four biggest pitfalls of strategy execution that we see in our day-to-day functions here. I'll run through them quickly, but we've got individual slides where we'll dive into each of them. So to start, we find that standards are really standards. The field of strategy execution itself is not new, but it's never really been formalized, some of like the other methodologies that you see in business practice. Second, missing metrics equals missed opportunities. We see people that struggle to identify effective metrics that designate success or failure on their themes and objectives and overall outcomes. Third, the silent killer, lack of prioritization. That one's fairly straightforward. And then four, updating is more important than creating the plan itself. So let's go ahead and jump in and dig into these a little bit more. Alrighty. Like I said, standards are rarely standard. This is something that when I first got into the field of strategy consultancy, I struggled with it because I wanted someone to be able to tell me exactly what the standards are and how I can replicate that over and over and over again. And realistically, it requires strategy development and execution requires some level of customization. Yet most people don't have an agreement on what the standard framework should be or the definitions for things. And Tom, the point that you dropped in the chat on getting people to even identify a successful objective or what you called a goal is sometimes it's describing something that is just their day-to-day functionality, right? Like that's not strategic. That doesn't shoot for anything. But it's hard to get people to even know how to define what their goal should be because there isn't that level of standardization. So we know that it looks different everywhere, but really being able to find that shared structure, be able to create those definitions and that framework, and be able to distribute that and educate your teams and your leaders on what that is will give you alignment as you go forward. Also, if you overcomplicate something, you're ultimately killing the clarity that you tried to execute on when you're creating the structure itself. So we find that a simple and consistent framework is what will get you a win every time. And lastly, strategy should directly connect to the overall operating outcomes or those operating goals that the company and the leadership has defined. So these are your EBITDA, your ARR, sometimes it's an enrollment goal. It depends on the industry, but being able to identify those top line operating outcomes and those goals there will really be what you drive everything towards, and then you get alignment as you go.
Yeah, a couple things I would add in here, and Shannon, I feel like this is probably one of the first things that we're often tackling with customers because that framework is so foundational to everything that builds on top of it. Is it's so easy to want to overcomplicate things. I literally, this is one of the ones I posted about on LinkedIn earlier this week because we were talking about it and I just gave the spoiler out that this was going to be one that we talked about is so many folks anchor really heavy to the latest book that they've read or to a specific framework. And we kind of joke internally a lot that we are acronym agnostic, whether you're tracking EOS, OKR, V2MOM, insert your letters here. Yes, framework is important, but it's being able to standardize that and communicate things, especially vocabulary, in a consistent way across your team because the words goal, initiative, priority, theme, objective all sound like they can be used interchangeably, and sometimes they can, but sometimes you actually mean different things by that. And so I think that middle bucket there of like, don't overcomplicate it, actually go with something simple that you can stick with, I would say is 10 times more important than whatever framework you choose. It's about staying consistent there and making sure folks understand, to your point, if we say the word objective, especially strategic objective. What do we mean by that? And more importantly, what do we not mean by that? So yeah, that keep the lights on work. Yes, those things have to happen, but that's not strategy. We need to focus on what are the bets that we want to make as a business. But Tom, I did see your comment in there. The alphabet soup sensation, very real. I joke you can just put three letters together and you probably have a new framework, and you could probably ask ChatGPT to like come up with a creative name for it. But yeah, I can't overemphasize this one enough because I think the foundation that you set, especially as a strategy and operations leader, like it is then your job to make sure that this stays consistent. Um, that standardization alone goes such a long way. And where we see folks that often are coming to us, like either with four failed rollouts on OKRs or frankly, like 25 different PowerPoints, usually the first thing we notice in those is that there's a very like mismatched alignment on wording and what something means. So can't emphasize this enough. It's the first thing we do when we chat with our customers, and the first thing that Shannon's often consulting on is, okay, let's figure out what the definition is. Doesn't matter what you call it. Let's give it a name, give it a definition, and make sure the team's really clear on that. Because I think that shared understanding is what ultimately has the ultimate impact.
Yeah.
All right. As we shared, or Shannon shared a moment ago, as in the preview here, the next one we want to talk about is missing metrics equals missed opportunities. And the subtitle here I think is really important that you can't execute what you can't measure. There's, a lot of variations on a sentence very similar to that. But I want to take a step back to talk about like what do we mean by this? Because I would say this is one of the most challenging areas for a lot of our customers where things get overcomplicated. Um, when we think about a strategy by nature is always going to have some risk to it, right? We're identifying things that we want to take bets on, places, areas we want to go to that are going to be challenging and that maybe are different than what we've done in the past. Um, what we want to make sure is that there is a clear understanding, not just of our vocabulary, like we talked on the last slide about, but also how we're going to measure success of our strategy so that we know when to pivot and when to persist. The biggest driver of this is being able to identify and articulate what are the measurements, the metrics, KPIs, again, insert an acronym here, key result. What are you ultimately going to measure that's going to drive success? So often, what we see is we see folks start to define these as completion of tasks or of projects. Those things absolutely have to happen, and there's a place for them. But if we are only ever tracking what we've done in terms of like a specific project or deliverable that we've said, hey, this is complete, we don't know if that deliverable actually yielded the results that we were hoping for or not. I was just talking with our director of account management about this, that an example here would be like if our ultimate strategy is that we want to like maybe we're going to change our pricing and we need to migrate folks into a new package. If we then go enable our team and we don't communicate what we're actually measuring of success, which is, X% of customers on a new package, and they just go and execute on retention and expansion, those aren't bad things, but it didn't help us accomplish our strategy. It didn't help us accomplish the end goal. And the only way in which they would know that is if we have a clear definition of success and what that looks like. Where we see this create a lot of challenges when we don't have clear metrics, is it results in a lot of priority fatigue for you and for your team. The reason that happens is because folks don't know what to say no or not now to. The urgent versus important is never going to go away. That's always going to be a challenge. But we need a way in which we can empower our teams to know when the right time to say, like, hey, not now. This isn't the right time for it, versus, hey, yes, I agree, let's do that. This isn't a perfect science where if it's not on the list, we don't ever do it. We need to be able to evolve it, but we need to always understand, is it pointing us back towards or getting us closer towards accomplishing, not just the words of that goal that we wrote down, but actually the metric of success. We also need to make sure there's really clear ownership created. I think this is really important to press into. Ownership doesn't mean you're the only person working on it, or that if it fails or succeeds, it's solely on you. Ownership means, hey, I'm the one responsible for making sure I'm giving a clear update to the team on where this is at. And the cleanest way to do that is to have a common metric you can drive back to. All of that coming together is that when we focus on results, not just activity, we create alignment inherently because we're showing and telling, and giving a place for people to look for our team on how are we going to know if this was successful. Generally speaking, in a perfect world, every strategy would, go according to plan. That's not going to happen. I've never seen it done. If yours is 100% to plan right now, I'm very impressed. Would love to chat with you. I want to know how you did it. The reality is we've got new things coming in every single day, and we need to be able to objectively as possible and use data to decide, should we pivot into that? Should we go explore that new motion? Or should we keep going where we're at and double down here? And your metrics are going to tell you that. The last thing I'll mention here is when you think about metrics, especially for something in more of an exploratory phase that's early in the strategy, something new you're testing out, you may have a lagging indicator identified, but maybe you're not going to see the results of this for a year. That's great. You still want to communicate that that's what you want to measure, but I would challenge you to start thinking a little sooner of, like, what are the leading indicators that are going to tell us if we're headed in the right direction here? If we say we want to, scale a whole new arm of our business, you're probably not going to see any revenue from that for a while because you have to build the thing and all of these things. What you want to look for, what are the leading indicators that are going to tell us that we still think we're headed in the right direction? So maybe it's driving more interest. Maybe it's doing a webinar and saying how many people attend when we talk about this topic. Maybe it's, pipeline created or things like that. We want to think earlier too, and marry those with leading indicators. But we always want to have our eye on what is the end success going to look like? What are we trying to drive towards? Frankly, answer the question of why are we doing this? One thing I'll say there is that really helps to also encourage you to make sure you're focused on strategic things, by asking what the impact is versus just saying we're going to do this thing. It's like, great, why are we doing that? What do we want to drive towards? So again, I could chat on this all day, but I this is one of the areas that I think so many people miss because it's hard, because it's not always fun to tie yourself to a number that maybe you don't fully control. Again, I would encourage you to take a step back. If you're the owner of that objective, you don't solely contribute to that anyways. Strategic planning is a team sport through and through. But we do have to have a measure of success that tells us if we're headed in the right direction or not so that we can make the right decisions as proactively as possible.
Right. And we always coach too that it is not recommended that the strategic initiatives and their tied metrics be a part of an annual performance review or anything like that. They really should be separated from the owner, when it comes to the health and the progress of the strategic plan versus their individual performance. There is some correlation there. Absolutely. They can be evaluated. However, the one for one is minimizing the dynamic nature of these numbers and where they come from and how they're influenced. So I always coach that because we do see a lot of hesitancy with people attaching their names to numbers in this way. That being said, also, I think one thing that I would encourage you all, if you are in the throes of strategic planning, is to try, as you're thinking about what your primary mission is going to be and those attached themes or pillars that you're driving towards, start to already think about what some of those metrics are, right? You need to, while you are being visionary and you're casting where you ultimately want to go, you also have to really ask yourself the healthy question: does my company, does my business, does my team have the data foundation to be able to support actually tracking progress on here? And most people do, and they just don't even know that they have it. Sometimes it is a time for you to ask yourself, like, do we need to start thinking about initiating some kind of strategic employment engagement survey to be able to pull data on some of these things that we're trying to track, whether that's through our HR policies or something else. It's something that I think more people could benefit from circulating that question in their mind at the early stages as well, so you don't get caught off guard once you start going into the details. And then you're like, oh, shoot, I don't have any way of measuring this. And then you feel like you have to be reactive.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Tom, it's a good question. I think we actually can speak to it a little bit here on the next slide here, the silent killer, which we call the lack of prioritization. My biggest thing that I talk about is that if everything is a priority, then nothing can get done. If you have tried to identify even sometimes more than 4 or 5 strategic initiatives per person, there is a very small percentage of people that have the capability to execute strongly and aggressively on 5 different important initiatives. And so I think if you, as the leader or the person that's ultimately making the assignment or determining the direction in which the strategic plan and its priorities are going to be assigned and to whom, I think being able to acknowledge that while the strategic plan can be comprehensive, it often makes more sense to tackle it in bite-sized chunks, whether that's quarterly, semi-annually, or you're developing a 3-year plan and you're breaking it down into 1-year intervals. Being able to minimize what you're defining as the priority and then ultimately assigning responsibility to gives you a lot more freedom. I think sometimes especially at the leadership level, there's the expectation that everyone can do everything, and then you don't see the meaningful progress towards anything. And that's really, really struggling. So your question was, do you have any advice on making sure someone doesn't end up owning too much compared to all of their peers? I think it goes back to that standardization. If you as the leader are ultimately making the decision that no one person is going to own more than 3 priorities, and if they do, then you're starting to have conversations about how that gets distributed to maybe that next level down, those L2s, those L3s. So while the leader might be overseeing that progress, the actual goal and objective that's been developed has ownership distributed outwards. That would be my direct answer to that question. I think that also helps with the second point here, which is misaligned or siloed plans dilute focus and slow decision making. So if you don't have things spread out across people and then also have really strong communication channels, people start to execute in siloed ways. And then we have this big chaotic problem where we can't actually make decisions because we've got 10 different points of input and no standardization on how it's coming in, and the identification of who ultimately is the decision maker or the driver on that. That's one thing that I was talking through with the client earlier this week was, they were saying, well, technically 3 people own this. And it's that 3 people are making meaningful contributions. And so they may own specific metrics or programs or initiatives within the objective itself. But let's drive to one person, one team that is ultimately responsible for this. And they're the one that kind of herd the cats too, right? Like they know that everyone comes to them, and then they schedule a regular touch point conversation to be able to make those have those discussions about the status updates, but the single owner is the one that's responsible for the decision making as well. And then shared visibility and clear prioritization drive alignment and progress. I think that that's a similar component of what you're hearing me echo in these other statements, but through the ability of writing down the plan itself, putting it in a central location, and as a leader, distributing that through standardization, through clear lines of communication, you get strong buy-in all the way down to the bottom level of the people who are the ones that are executing on a day-to-day function. You drive that up to those top level themes, and you get people that are rallied behind the same vision. And then you are able to communicate out the progress as well because you have these strong metrics. So you can confidently say, here were our wins last month. This is the progress that we're making towards these bigger goals, and share that. And you can then call out individual contributions to that in those ways. So you drive the alignment and the buy-in that ultimately gets people to show up and execute even better moving forward.
Yeah, I echo all of those things. I think, yeah, Tom, your comment was Very timely on that because it's very common we see that. And I will say that one of the biggest culprits of people owning too many objectives does tend to sometimes fall into operations or strategy leaders who are willing to take on owning an objective that nobody else wants to. And at times will be the first ones to fall on the sword and say, you know what, I'll run it, I'll run it. But what we do is we don't give folks the ability to then say like, hey, no, actually, you should be stepping up and owning this piece. And so I have seen plenty of strategy and operations leaders who own 10 plus objectives. Some of them are just owning them on behalf of other folks because they can trust themselves to put in the update. But what we do when we do that is we enable folks to not take that ownership. And so I will fully admit I'm guilty of this as well. But I will say, like, this is when we're either, if they're owning too many, it's usually that they're taking it so that somebody else doesn't have to. Or the other sign that I'll say here is when I see a lot of people owning objectives, I start to question if they're truly strategic objectives or if they're putting in tasks in there.
Mm,
At the end of the day, to Shannon's point, like set a standard and then stick to it. So maybe that's three, maybe that's five. It's going to depend on the organization. I will say if it's 10 to 15, it's probably too many. So use that as your guardrails there. But set that standard and make sure folks follow it because it forces them then to identify what is actually most important. And to Shannon's point in all of this, choose a priority. Like it's okay if you say, this is priority number three instead of number one. That doesn't mean it's not important, but it
yeah.
does allow folks to then be able to manage their time effectively and make sure that they understand what's contributing most or what you're expecting to contribute most to the overall strategy.
Yeah, I feel like there's a good point for me to jump in here and talk about the opposite end of that spectrum is when you have people that are not wanting to take ownership of strategic priorities or goals. And the healthy pushback that I tend to offer in those situations is if you're not willing to own it, how much of a priority is it really? Is typically the question that I pose back, and that's doesn't always feel great. It doesn't always feel comfortable. But the reality is, if we are calling it as one of our business's strategic priorities, and you have a business lead or some other, whether it's department lead or whomever, that is resistant to taking on the ownership, how can we actually say that we're prioritizing this? How can we even say that we're showing some kind of level of commitment towards driving this other piece? So it's a level of pushback and coaching that I offer is to really just ask if we're not willing to prioritize it, is it really even a priority? If we can't find somebody or if this individual isn't willing to commit to it or get excited about taking ownership of it, really like what does that say about their buy-in on the strategic execution and the plan itself is something that I
Yeah.
always say.
I think that's a good point because I would say if you do find yourself in that, dig in, understand like what their hesitations are.
Mhm.
Maybe they agree that it should be a priority, but they're not aligned with how we're going to measure it or how we're going to that they maybe they don't feel like they have the resources to support it. Identify that early. If you're sensing hesitation, dive into it. It can be uncomfortable, but at the end of the day, you're going to find out things that you'll find out eventually, and it's better to know it up front. So I'd really encourage you to ask folks the question of like, hey, it feels like maybe you have some thoughts on this, you have some hesitation, like what are those? And be willing to talk about them and brainstorm and problem solve. Because a lot of times it's not the like strategy itself they might have the question on. It's like, hey, do I feel like I could actually do this? So I totally agree with that, Shannon. I think that's a really great point to dive in on. All right. As we round out our four here, the last one we want to talk about is the updating versus just creating. I would say the vast majority of businesses take the time to create a strategic plan. Why? Because they're probably having to do that, whether that's for their board, maybe they're a public entity, maybe we work with a number of nonprofits and a number of higher ed institutions. They're required to publish those. And so they create them and then they go and sit on a shelf, which is like so painful because the amount of time that you probably spent creating that is not small. The amount of folks you involved in it, I generally say like creating a strategic plan is a very expensive initiative. To be clear, I think it's worth it, but it's expensive. And it's really expensive if you don't actually commit to then executing and updating on it. And I think this is where Shannon, you were mentioning this coaching to at the offsite earlier this week. Um, it is great that you created a plan. And when you leave those doors, you're going to have all this hype, like, yes, let's go do it. And then if you're in a fiscal year of January, you're going to take the holidays off, you're going to come back in January slow, and then all of a sudden, before you know it, it's February, and those priorities that you had all this energy about in November and December, suddenly don't feel that exciting anymore. And this is where we have to push through the like emotional side of strategic planning and say, we're going to do it anyways. I have literally talked with a customer who quite literally pulled a binder off of the shelf behind them of their strategic plan. And I'm like, it is literally sitting on a shelf. Like, usually I'm speaking about this figuratively, but the reality is when it's doing that, it's not evolving. And your strategic plan should not be set, forget, hit print or PDF, and we don't ever look at it again until the end of the year or till our board requires us to give some sort of update. And then we spend all this time giving an update because we've got 3 months or 6 months worth of information to try to collect. Your plan should be evolving. Your business is evolving. The world around you is evolving. Your plan should be evolving as well.
Yeah.
Where,
Hey, Abby, do you want to refresh your screen? Maybe we're still looking at there we go. Now we
got
see
it.
it. We're with you now.
Thank you. Um, the biggest thing I will say with this is that we want to make sure that when we're thinking about this, that we're really committed um, to the execution mode, and more often than not, the tone here gets set at the top. When folks can sense uncommitted leadership to providing updates on the plans, or that the plan is inactive, I promise you your team can sense that first and foremost, and I promise you it will lead to reactivity. What I mean by that is when you are, oh shoot, we have a board meeting in 2 weeks. Everyone goes, drop what you're doing, get us the latest update. First of all, that pain is all too real. Two, that is a really, really reactive approach. It's not evolving, it's not dynamic. It's reacting to what's in the rearview mirror versus being able to look out the dashboard. And I think when we think about what we want, this feels obvious. This time of year, everyone's going to be like, "Yes, I'm committed to it. It's super easy." But I promise you, when rubber meets the road, the habits that you create to set, the standards that you then reinforce are going to be what helps drive your strategy or not. There are always going to be things competing for your time, attention, and priority. And so if you don't have these set, which we'll talk about these in a moment, it will lead to reactivity. The opposite of that we've seen done incredibly well with a number of different organizations that we work with is setting standards here. Almost everyone has some sort of monthly or maybe it's bi-weekly leadership team meeting. Anchor onto that and say, hey, we're all going to join this meeting regardless. We all know we join it every 2 weeks or once a month. We're going to start by talking about our strategy. And so prior to that, we need to have an update on it. We don't need to spend that meeting going through roll call and saying, okay, are you green, yellow, red? That all should happen ahead of time with context provided and a pre-read sent so that you can spend that time actually talking through these challenges. When we talk about strategic planning being a team sport, like this is where that comes to life, is in those rooms, whether that's virtual or in person, being able to say, "Hey, I saw you were behind on this. This looks like what you identified as your blocker. I have an idea on that." Like you should be problem solving together, but you can only do that if you're actually keeping your plan alive, and not just letting it sit on a shelf. We want this to be something that becomes a regular rhythm or cadence. Again, we use the word ritual a lot, but adopt your own language. What we're looking for here is making sure that you have a true, consistent, that does not get moved operating cadence. Make that promise to yourself, make that promise to your team, and then put it in the calendar to make sure it happens. If you're leveraging Elate or a system like us, make sure it's sending out those reminders on the rituals. This does not have to be manual. It shouldn't be manual. We'll talk to the AI piece in a minute, but it's more important that we're having those checkpoints so that we can actually discuss what's happening and what we need to do to change versus constantly looking in the rearview mirror and saying, well, yeah, last quarter was tough. Okay, great. Why didn't we address it during the quarter? So I'll get off my soapbox here. We want to talk through a more practical way to put this into practice, but this piece I would say is just so important. And right now, people are highly energized on creating the plan. Please don't let your efforts go to waste. We want to see that leveraged and consistently updated.
Yeah, I think that's a good transition into what that framework is that we tend to work on. And I want to give the disclaimer. I mean, Abby, you spoke to this a little bit, but I want to be explicitly clear. We recognize the lift that this is. We talk a lot about it from like this is a muscle, the idea of embedding strategic execution updates and the planning itself through the updates and then into the edits that you make on a quarterly or semi-annually or annually basis on it. That is a muscle and it will fatigue as you start to grow it. And so if it feels discouraging at the beginning or this feels very overwhelming, find ways like Abby was talking about to latch on to pre-existing components and then build it out. You can't just realistically, while in your world as a strategic leader, this is a priority, it may not have the healthy rhythm and adaptation across the business that everyone is in agreement that the strategic execution on the plan is a priority, and you have to build that muscle up. So this one feels a little scary for some people when they're not operating in that piece. And just want to call that out and acknowledge that as very normal and very typical. And it does take showing up every month to touch this in a different way in order to strengthen it. So what we talk through as far as an ideal kind of year-round cadence or ritual, we call them, is that you do what a lot of you are doing right now, which is you build that plan typically somewhere around the end of the year, whether that's a calendar year or a fiscal year, you're really getting that leadership together and determining what those top line priorities are through themes, pillars, various things. And then that gets distributed. And you really, by the end of that year, have this strong collective plan. You distribute that out, whether that's in a call to action meeting or however you're pitching that to your department leads and they're cascading it down. But that gets well communicated. And then you require some form of status update. Ideally, I see the most successful teams doing this bi-weekly. That's going in and providing both the metric update on the actual progression towards those objectives, but also status updates, being able to highlight things. Bi-weekly to me is a pretty big ask for those that are transitioning to this. So more realistically, this looks monthly. And then also monthly, getting those touch points with those teams. And then also, again, at that high leadership level, invite those leaders at that executive level back into the conversation monthly so that they have that sense of ownership, that they have line of sight on the progress, and also give you all the moment to raise the flag on the asks. This is the reason why we pull this together. And yes, the status updates on sharing the wins are very important, but really what we encourage those conversations to be around is, hey, where do you need help? What's your blocker right now? And what can I, as maybe a leader from a different department, might be able to do to help it? It's not always rhythmic that you are having those cross collaboration conversations. Or you need to bring in one of the big guns to come in and make a piece of advice or make a decision on how to move forward. So monthly is really where we preach those meetings on those progress reviews coming in. And then, as we all know, these strategic plans, as Abby said, they tend to not be executed perfectly, not because of any individual's fault, but just by the nature of the, I don't want to say chaos, that has a negative connotation, but just the chaos of the business environment. There are a lot of variables that will impact your progress and impact your priorities as a business throughout the year. And so we also encourage teams to be constantly evaluating what the priorities on those objectives are. Do we need to pivot, persist, or pioneer as we go? These are our big pillars that we talk about, is when you think about your objective and its progress is there something holding it up, or do we need to pivot because of a new case that we understand that's affecting our business cases? Do we persist? Do we just keep going forward because we're seeing really good results, or we know that this is still the most prioritized objective that we've identified and we're going in? Or do we need to ask ourselves, okay, maybe we've misinterpreted something, or we really need to just completely start something fresh as we go? These are healthy questions to be asking. Some people feel like they have to really hold very tightly their initial strategic plan. And while there is a time and place for that, absolutely, I think there's also a healthy level of inviting those questions mid-year as well as you go.
Yeah, one thing I saw come in the comments from Sarah Kelly that I think is really related to this is she mentioned being at a high growth firm where they're shifting regularly. Like, how do you manage that? Because I think you're spot on, Sarah. It isn't always possible or even prudent to say not now to something. Like, I sometimes there's things that come up that you're like, we weren't anticipating this, but this is a huge opportunity. We got to go and we got to go now. And frankly, not waiting is the right answer. And so this is just as much an art as it is a science, but I would say what you want to kind of keep a sense of is we used to have this, I wish I had the slide in our presentation, but we used to have this kind of like scaled slide that is like set it and forget it on one side and Wild Wild West on the other. And what we want to anchor towards is somewhere in the middle there where we're not saying set it and forget it. We said it was a priority, 8 months ago, so we have to do it simply because we said we should do it, even though everything, the writing on the wall tells us to move away from it. We don't want to do that, but we don't want to go to Wild Wild West where it's just straight chaos and we're changing priorities on a regular basis, meaning like, hey, every single month we have a new priority coming up. Um, we've had a customer describe this as like flavor of the day. Like,
Mhm.
walk in, what's my CEO's flavor of the day that day of like what's going to be most important to them. There is a middle ground here. So we tend to recommend always having a regular touch point. Maybe for your organization that is monthly. We typically see it more on a quarterly basis, but to your point, if there's something that's coming up, don't not do it if you know it's a great idea just because you haven't hit that. Maybe for your organization that looks like monthly, and we say, hey, every month we're going to revisit this. If there's new things that we need to bring to the table, let's talk about them. One of our customers that we met with, I think it was end of last week, we were chatting through the way in which they do this internally. They have a great process for it. They call it the lab, and the whole idea is that they're bringing new ideas to the table, vetting them out, then getting approval, like, yes, let's go do it. And I think that that helps them a lot to be able to decipher which priorities are worth disrupting versus which ones can wait. So
Right.
I'd really encourage you to kind of think through something like that too, of what are we expecting the outcome, the impact of this to be? Because that can help justify, like, yes, we need to do it now. The time, like, now's the time. Strike while the iron's hot, or whatever that phrase is. So I do think that, Sarah, you bring up a really great point, and one of the things we never want to do is just paint in broad brush strokes to say, like, this is always the rule and you should never change it. In fact, I disagree with that. I think you should be dynamic, you should be evolving. There is a point, and you will feel it, your team will definitely feel it, and they'll express it to you, where they feel like things are changing too much, and they're like, well, I'm being asked to do this, but now I'm being called into this. Some of that's uncomfortability of living in a high growth or working in a high growth environment, but you'll be able to tell when that feels like, okay, this is happening like every month, or this is happening twice a month. Like, that's too often, and our team isn't able to stay heads down to make enough impact. The other thing that you'll be able to tell, like kind of your signal for this, is going to be that the results that you said were important don't get hit. That is also a sign that, like, hey, we're not letting any of these bets play out long enough to see the results. So
Yeah.
definitely an art more than a science here. I won't pretend like this is like there's just one hard and fast rule, and if you follow that, it'll all work perfectly. We live in a dynamic world, so that's not always the case. But I think that that's a really good point there.
Yeah, and I think if I can add to Abby, I think when we talk about the pivot, persist, and pioneer, and when we're constantly evaluating the strategic plan, I our recommendation is that the themes and the pillars, so those top line
Mhm.
priorities for the business, whether that's grow revenue or expand leadership development or some of these like North Star priorities for the business, we recommend that those are not changed. You want to spend the time to really identify what it is that are the movers and shakers of your business growth. And if you identify those correctly on the onset, the objectives are what will constantly be evolving. So at the objective level, so everything that falls underneath those top line themes, that's where we're asking ourselves the pivot, persist, pioneer. And I've seen that work really well, especially in the scenarios of high growth environments, because when you're sitting there asking yourself, is this truly a priority for us? Is this really something that matters and is worth us pivoting for? It should always tie back to one of those themes. And if it doesn't, then you have to ask yourself a whole other set of questions. But being able to have those top line drivers of what this business's mission is on and for is what really grounds you when you're asking yourself, how do we pivot our strategic direction? It's not changing the foundation of those top line themes rather than the objectives and the goals that filter underneath those that might be changing more regularly.
I think that's such an important call out. 7 years ago, when Brooks and I, my other co-founder and our CEO, were first pitching Elate, like the vision that we always referenced to this was Waze for your business, or Google Maps for your business. And the idea was, Shannon, to your point exactly, you know what the end outcome you're trying to seek is. There are a lot of paths to get from one place to the other. I mentioned we're in Indianapolis. You want to go to Chicago. The most efficient path is usually 65. But guess what? 65 has a lot of accidents on it. So just because we initially said we're going to try to plan to get to 65 doesn't mean that when Google Maps or Waze or whatever you use tells you there's an accident ahead, the highway shut down, don't stay on the highway. Like, get off, find a different path. When you see those opportunities, like, don't just do something because you said it was important and you're going to do it. Remind yourself where you're going. I'm trying to get to Chicago. I'm not trying to take 65 to get to Chicago. I'm trying to get to Chicago. And so at the end of the day, when you have that clear outcome identified at the end of what you're trying to go towards, it gives you the freedom and flexibility to say, okay, when better paths arise, let's take them. Let's not like wait on that, because it's going to get us to our goal faster or more efficiently or whatever that looks like. So that would be the other thing. The last thing I'll mention, Sarah, is When we communicate this to the team, I think it's important to set the stage at the onset when you're sharing your strategic plan that we anticipate this will change. Um, we anticipate that like there will be evolution here. We want there to be evolution here. Set the standard at the onset to say like it's okay that we change. It doesn't mean we failed. It means that we're evolving. So I just want to add those last 2 points of clarity there.
Yeah, and Erin, that's a really good call out, right? These we're talking about your example being in education and K-12 environment specifically is probably one of the most direct on the other end of the spectrum as far as how we see companies thinking about and evolving their strategic planning. Not that one is better or worse whatsoever, but there really is a true different cadence to that. And yes, in the nonprofit and the education world, we typically see strategic plans being set in a 3 to 5 year cadence. Our recommendation is though the plan itself and specifically those top line priorities are not going to change regularly, they are going to be set in stone for your 3 to 5 years. We do still recommend that there be a moment of pause through the leadership, whether that's at the district level or at the school level, where you're evaluating those goals underneath it annually, right? You have to stay dynamic beyond that, especially now, given the environment that the education is in, is being able to pivot on top of that. So the goals that you're setting at the top line, those big movers and shakers, those are not changing until you all execute another strategic planning process. But there still should be some kind of exercise annually where you reevaluate what those individual tactics are. Yep, exactly. Yes. Yep. You're doing it great then. Alrighty. And Katie, I do see, or yeah, Katie, I see your comment or your question in here. I think it's actually something that we could probably hit on after Abby this last slide. So want to call out that we see it and we will answer it, but let's go to the next slide first.
Yeah. What we want to kind of wrap this up with is bringing in the reality of the world that we're all living in right now, which is we're living in this era of a ton of evolution with AI, which can be both daunting and also incredibly exciting when harnessed well. Knowing there are a wide variety of folks representing different types of companies and industries on this call, what I want to say is that this is not like bite off everything at once. We want to talk through a few practical ways that we see AI coming into the conversation with strategy specifically. I would say from the onset, I mean, we've been talking internally about AI for I guess it's a couple of years now. One of the things that we feel is fundamentally important when you think about leveraging AI within strategy specifically is viewing that as a thought partner, viewing that as a resource you can help unlock versus viewing that as a robot that's going to run your strategy. There should always be, we use the phrase internally, and I think this is broadly used, like keep the human in the loop. There should always be, this should be human led with AI serving as an unlock for you in terms of how we can start to either do things a lot more efficiently, identify things that would take a human far longer, use them as a true thought partner. And so obviously within Elate, there's a few ways in which we go about this within our own product, but we want to speak to this from a philosophical perspective. First and foremost, talking through the planning process itself. There's a lot that you can leverage AI for as you think about developing your plan. One, in terms of helping you refine like objective names. Even the biggest thing I've seen here is like helping you identify or brainstorm what good key results can be. Don't let AI write your strategy. I want to be very clear. Use it to help you though. Use it to understand, like get a starting point. Sometimes starting with a blank screen is really daunting. Within Elate, this looks like being able to leverage, we call it strategy advisor, alongside as you're creating objectives, asking it questions, asking it to challenge you. Like, does this make sense? Are there other connection points here? So often we'll see like three people create very similar objectives. Like use AI to help you consolidate that to understand where there's overlap and start to scenario model like, okay, if this, then this. The middle bucket here is all around the execution side. So as you actually move into that execution process, keep your rituals, but allow AI to enter into those to help surface those blockers for you versus having to dig through however many objectives you have in your plan. Even small organizations can end up with hundreds of objectives. So using AI to actually surface those blockers, bring out the signals from the noise, I think is incredibly important. Also using that to help provide those status updates. We as humans tend to want to paint things rosier than they might always be. And that can be really risky in your plan if you think something's going well, but really the data is telling you it's not. So leveraging AI to actually help you or help your team craft status updates will help you get more updates, which will prompt the right conversation. And all of that leading towards being more proactive. So being able to identify those risks earlier, that is probably the most important thing you can do to keep your plan evolving is we always say, find the bends before they become breaks. Identifying a bend and sometimes even a break is not a bad thing. I'd rather know it exists than think it doesn't and find out later it does. So we want to use that to help us be more dynamic, to adjust in real time by knowing where those hurdles, challenges, or friction points are starting to emerge as something's slowing down, as we're not making progress that we thought we would. Let's talk about it. Maybe that is the right time, Sarah, to bring in, new ideas or things to pivot into. So we wanted to make sure we spent a little bit of time here. We have other webinars that we've talked a lot more and almost solely focused on AI. So if you didn't get a chance to catch those, they should be on our website. If you have questions on any of that, you can feel free to put it in the chat as well. We'll make sure to follow up with you. But we wanted to bring this into the loop because these are not human-powered things that only you can do. These are things that you can leverage AI for to help make yourself more efficient, and help unlock and avoid these pitfalls.
Yeah. I think I was going to say we haven't been extremely explicit about it, but like we are a strategic execution software platform, and so a lot of what we're talking about, as far as what we've seen success in and how it functions is through the lens of how we've developed and why we've developed the platform that we have. It's a tool that guides on top of all of that. So if there are things that have resonated with you, or you're having a moment right now where you're saying, man, I really need some help, whether it's through these coaching components or through some kind of software that would ultimately help streamline some of the distribution here. Chase, one of our colleagues, just dropped a link in, and we'd happy to explore that conversation. But nothing else. These are just two strategy leaders that really enjoy conversation like this. So while I do love Elate, it's more about being able to just share ideas and hear kind of the thought process going around with other people as well. So I do want to make sure I answer, Katie, your question. You asked what level of detail do we recommend sharing across the organization, and I think the way the tone that I'm hearing through there is already you're thinking about the structure, and how you would distribute one set of information to one group and another set of information to another group. And I think that that's spot on. And ultimately what we recommend is at your executive level, right, there's full line of sight. Then you start getting into that L2. So whether that's heads or department leads or whatever, it even can be business units. Sometimes we work with really large enterprise level companies where you've got, your Europe team, you've got that varies, business to business, but really bringing in that next level of leadership and showing them the whole picture is very helpful, because then those different, whether it's global unit or business lead or department chair, has the ability to see what others are prioritizing. They can see their objectives, just to know how what their work is doing ties to the broader mission of the company, but also where it might be impacting others along the way. So we encourage that all leads at that L2 level get a full line of sight. It's then when you get into that next level, L3s and below, that we recommend that those department leads own the distribution, and where they feel like it's important to show the cross collaboration on the objectives that are being worked on other departments, then sure, bring that in. But really at that level, it should be primarily focused on exclusively where their work in that department is feeding to the broader vision of the company. So they'll see those top line operating outcomes, they'll see those themes, and then they see their department's objectives, but they wouldn't necessarily get details and insight on every single other teams. Not because that information is restrictive or because they can't, it's just you start to get into a mode where that level of detail becomes too hard to digest, and then they lose focus on exactly what they're supposed to be working on. So that's what we see the most success in. It really drives like specific clarification, on what people are working towards, but showing them that bigger why so that they feel ownership and driving the mission forward.
This actually ties, I think, Jim, you had left a comment kind of towards the start of this, of one of the biggest challenges you all face is cascading that plan to every position. With everything Shannon just mentioned, we strongly recommend, we call it like a milestone approach. Start at the top, make sure there's really clear understanding there, because if there's not, I promise that will cascade down. Then go to that next level. And these things shouldn't be like rushed out just to say that we've done it. Be really intentional with that, making sure that every time you go down a layer, you're being really explicit on what you're asking for. Like, is there an ask of something they need to do? Do they just need visibility into it? Making sure you're really intentional there. So often we see folks set the strategy at the top level and then say, okay, get my ICs to connect to it. And all of a sudden you're like diluting this plan and you're going so granular that you get into performance management and folks lose sight of the why. So I do recommend being really intentional with that approach. It's something that we coach with every customer that we work with is like start small. If you nail that, every layer after that's going to be a lot easier. But that's going to tell you where your challenges are. It's a lot harder to fix those challenges at that kind of top level priority if you've already cascaded down because you're going to be giving your team whiplash. So I don't always recommend necessarily going to every single level of your organization or team. Sometimes that's not the right answer at the start, especially if you've had a lot of like scar tissue or past rollouts that didn't go well. Your team's going to be resistant. So show them what great looks like, give them visibility into it before you actually cascade that down into every position. And you'll be surprised how many team members are going to feel more empowered just by having the visibility there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, everybody. This has been wonderful. Abby, it looks like there's another small connection for you as we dig or as we close ourselves out. But it's been great to see some familiar names that joined us today, as well as to hear some new voices. So hopefully you all came away with at least one thing that you didn't know before you started, or you feel validated in something that you are already feeling and on a new path to solve already.
Absolutely. As a reminder, there's a couple ways to get in touch with us. I see Aaron loved our fellowship connection. We have a fellow on our staff right now, so we're keeping it rolling here in Indy. But if you need to get in touch with us, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're also both on LinkedIn, so feel free to find us there. If you have other questions, go for it. We really appreciate you guys taking the lunch hour if you're here in Eastern time, or I know we had folks all over to chat with us about this. And yeah, we're excited to keep the conversations going. We've got, I believe, another session like this that we're going to be scheduling here in the December time period. So be on the lookout for that. But really great to connect with all of you. And again, yeah, Ashley, if you ever want to chat St. Louis, we'll just, have a whole separate session on that and strategic planning. I could go on for days. So really appreciate everyone's time.